you don't know me, I'm one of the three co-chairs of the ASCE-NOAA task force, along with Bilal Ayub and Amanda McCarty from NOAA. If you've participated in some of these webinar or meetings in the past, this one's a little bit different. The work of the task force over the last few years has really been to kind of establish first a kind of a broad understanding of what kind of federal products, data products, et cetera, could be transitioned fairly quickly for civil engineering use. That then grew into a more detailed analysis of how different kinds of data, both observational data and future projection data, could fit into an understanding of how specific ASCE guidance documents, engineering standards, and manuals of practice. That was in 2024. That kind of we were trying to inform ongoing ASCE committee work at that time. What we're doing now is we're kind of trying to transition. We know that many of the ASCE standards are either going to begin a new cycle of updates in the next year or two, or maybe there's some emerging standards that are anticipated. So what we're trying to do now is bring people together to talk a little bit about the products that might already be available. In this case, we're talking about temperature, intensity, duration, and frequency curves. We've got presentations from different groups in that federal space that are producing these kinds of tools and data products with actual authoring members of these ASCE standards and manuals of practice. So this is much more of a peer-to-peer. The way I look at it is with the new cycle of a standard coming up, say in the next year or two, this gives the committee a little bit of a chance to think about what data they might have available at the time. And the other part of it is, especially on the NOAA side, how might some of these data products be managed slightly different, the output made more easily available? How far down that engineering application could a data product go? What's the right kind of renewal cycle? What's the shelf life, so to speak? So those are the kinds of more of the practical issues that we want to talk about at these small group technical discussions, is really trying to look forward to that next cycle of ASCE standards. So it's a little bit different. We're really hoping to foster a discussion between the providers and the users, so to speak. Part of the value of this recording is not everybody that's interested in temperature products could necessarily be on the call. So now this way we've got a record where they can kind of follow your discussions and think about the implications themselves. So what I'd like to do with that kind of framing is I'd like to go around, let everybody introduce yourself. Now, we've got a large number of people. If you go beyond your name, affiliation, and especially either the federal program you're representing or the ASCE, why you think you're here as an ASCE member, we're not going to get very far into the discussion. So try to stay kind of brief. But if you've got a particular use case you're interested in and you want to take a couple sentences to put that out there so we can be thinking about it, this would be a good time. So I'm going to start with Bilal because I know Bilal knows the drill and he'll set a good example. So Bilal, why don't you go next?
Yes, hi, my name is Bilal Ayub. I'm professor of civil and environmental engineering at the University of Maryland. I co-chair the task force, as Dan mentioned earlier. And my area of interest and expertise is in risk analysis in engineering and economics, with a focus at the present on adaptation of our engineering practice.
All right, thank you. I'm going to try to do this in somewhat of a systematic order. Amanda, are you on?
I am. Hi, everyone. Amanda McCarty. I'm the NOAA co-chair for the task force. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Amanda. Craig Musselman.
Unmute. There you go. My camera's on the blink. I'm Craig Musselman. I'm a consulting engineer. I'm the chair of the ASCE Committee on Adaptation to a Changing Climate. My interest is in disseminating information here on a temperature tool to practicing engineers throughout the profession. And I'm interested because we have impending two tools and that may differ a little bit, and interested in how we present that and explain that to civil engineers. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Brennan Bean.
Yeah, Brennan Bean, Associate Professor of Statistics, Utah State University, working a lot with the ASCE in Chapter 7, which is rain and snow loads, as well as Chapter 36, future conditions. Think a lot about snow, both historically and in a future context.
All right, thanks, Brennan. Chris Anderson.
Hi, yeah, I'm Chris Anderson. I'm with EA Engineering. I am involved in this because I'm on the ASCE Committee on Adapting to a Changing Climate. And as part of that, we had a subtask group working on requirements for reporting, providing, delivering temperature products.
All right, thanks, Chris. Joe Barsugli.
Hi, I am Joe Barsugli, University of Colorado at Boulder. I also work with NOAA's Physical Sciences Laboratory, and I'm a grant from the Climate Program Office to work on, among other things, temperature and drought projections and density, duration, and frequency analyses.
All right, thanks, Joe. Megan, are we recording? I just wanted to double check.
I'm getting a note that we are.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Adriana Formby Fernandez. Hi,
Yes.
Adriana.
Hi, I'm the architecture and engineering sector lead for user engagement as part of the industry initiative through NCEI. Nice to meet you all.
All right, thanks, Adriana. Ahmed Abdalan.
Hi everyone, Ahmed Abdullah, Assistant Professor at SUNY Polytechnic Institute. I'm a member of the ICE Load Committee, Chapter 10 in ASCE 7, and a member of the also ICE Load and Future Conditions, Chapter 36. Great to meet everyone. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Ahmed. Allison Crimmins.
Hello, I'm Allison Crimmins. I lead our industry partnership work at NOAA's National Center for Environmental Information.
Thank you. Ann Cosmel.
Hey everybody, it's Ann Cosmal. I am now at HOK here in Washington, D.C., supporting all the work firm-wide regarding resilience. You all know that I've got a laundry list of use cases because we've talked about this in the past when we were all out there in Ruston together. Formerly at the U.S. General Services Administration, particularly interested in how temperature extremes and those ways in which it affects building enclosure and the at and below grade conditions. Over.
All right, thank you. Barbara, am I going to get this right here? Bousted?
So close. Barbara Bousted. Hi.
Bousted. Okay.
I am with NOAA's NIHIS program, National Integrated Heat Health Information System, as the Heat Services Program Manager.
All right. Excellent. Thank you. Allison Crimmins.
Well, you got me already, but I'm still here.
My bad. The names keep shuffling around. Brennan Bean. Brian Parsons. Are you with us, Brian?
Yeah, I'm there. Sorry, I'm clicking. Brian Parsons, staff point of contact for EWRI in Cooper and Center for Technical Advancement.
All right, thank you. Un Cha.
Hi everyone. I'm Yun Cha, Associate Professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Committee on the Climate Change Adaptation, and I have been helping Craig for that committee, and I'm also on the Structural Load Combination Subcommittee for ASCE 7, and regarding to the temperature, I have been using temperature projections for mostly future hurricane wind risk projections. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Soon. Greg Kinney.
Yes, I'm with Alyeska Pipeline Service Company in Anchorage, and I'm attending as a member of the Coal Regions Engineering Division.
All right, thank you, Greg. Heather Brooks.
Hey all, Heather Brooks with BGC Engineering in Calgary. I'm a practicing cold regions engineer and a member of the Cold Regions Engineering Division.
All right, thank you, Heather. I Simpson, you come up as I Simpson. I'm afraid I don't know your first name.
Ian Simpson. I'm research assistant professor at the University of Tennessee. My main research is in stormwater management, particularly as urban migration and climate change are threatening us.
Sorry, Ian, now that I see you, I recognize you, so my apologies.
No problem.
Let's see. How about Jordan Branham?
Hey everybody, Jordan Branham. I'm in Argonne National Laboratory as our group lead in natural hazard analytics and resilience. Do a lot of work on the data development for ClimRR portal, and that includes a number of different heat products. So yeah, thanks for having us.
All right, thank you. Maggie Allen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie Allen. I'm a climate and health program policy manager at NOAA's Climate Program Office. I'll be presenting later about our products of heat and NIAS services.
All right, thanks, Maggie. Russ Vos.
Hi, all. I'm Russ Vos. I'm at NOAA NCEI. I work with Allison and Adriana on the industry initiative, and I think I'm technically the architecture and engineering sector lead, but none of that would really happen without the help from people like Adriana and Morgan, who preceded her, and a whole great cast of characters. So happy to be here today.
All right, thanks, Russ. Ruth Hawker.
Morning, my name is Ruth Hawker. I am ASCE staff, and I'm currently serving as the technical director for the Water Institute's EWRI, COPRI, and CTA.
All right, thanks, Ruth. Sihan Lee.
Hey, Dan. Sihan Lee with RWDI. I was the immediate past chair of Committee on Adaptation to a Changing Climate, a member of a few ASC committee, including load combination, wind load subcommittee, and a future conditions subcommittee related to temperature. I'm also on the National Building Code of Canada standing committee, and one of the task group is related to the temperature. I think that's the most relevant to this working group.
All right,
Thank you.
Thanks, Sihan. Stephen H. I don't know your last name.
Oh, yeah, sorry, it's Halcom. I'm principal geotechnical engineer here in Anchorage. I'm also on the Cold Regions Engineering Division as well as ASC 32 committee. Mainly interested in kind of the discussion and use of air temperature as primarily relates to climate change.
All right, thanks. Shirley Clark.
Sure. Shirley Clark, EWRI past president and member of the task force. And I apologize, I just got my audio connected. And interested in this because temperature certainly has a lot to do with survival of nature-based vegetation, nature-based solutions, and also how many of our materials perform in urban stormwater applications and other water applications.
All right, thank you, Shirley. Teng Wu.
Hi everyone, this is Teng Wu. I'm a professor at the University of Buffalo. I'm interested in the community resilience and the hurricane and the current and the future climate. So I'm sitting on various committees within the ASCE related to climate change and related to infrastructure resilience. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Teng. Tom Wall.
Yeah, hey, I'm Tom. I'm with Argonne National Laboratory, the Center for Resilience and Decision Science, and I work with Jordan very closely. And a lot of our focus has been on just working with power utilities, emergency managers, and other critical infrastructure owners and operators about what types of climate and weather data they need. Thanks.
All right, thank you. All right, I think I got everybody. If I missed you, can you raise your hand electronically or just introduce yourself? All right, very good. All right, Megan, why don't you put up the agenda? And we'll get started. All right, so thank you. Again, one of the things that I just want to frame this, there are part of the workshop that we had in 2024, and there's a ASCE-NOAA workshop report that goes into tremendous detail. was focused on really understanding a large number of engineering use cases and how those use cases apply, might shape product development, primarily at NOAA, but across the federal space, for any program that was interested. But in those cases, what we were doing is we were really understanding those use cases. We were trying to reach some kind of a conclusion about, quite honestly, civil engineering practice is very diverse. If you poll an inadequate sample of engineers, you're going to get a large number of answers about what they're looking for their practice. So beyond understanding the concept of, well, we need temperature, rainfall, wind, sea level rise, beyond the broad information that we need to understand those hazards, we're trying to drill now down into a handful of use cases, because the concept is if engineering standards evolve and deal with non-stationarity in some of these environmental hazards, climate change, many of them related to climate change, we're going to serve a much broader number of engineers, because most engineers in their practice rely on standards to guide that practice. So if we can try to stay focused on like a handful of use cases that are really reflective of where the ASCE standards or manuals of practice are going, at least initially, I think that's going to be our most, that's what we're really trying to do. We're trying to kind of establish a dialogue here that could be repeated periodically as each standard cycle kind of starts up. So we're building the airplane a little bit while we're flying, but I think if you bear with me, we'll be in good shape. But think about that before you start asking questions about the use case you have in mind. Think about how broadly applicable it is, and how these programs might want to consider maybe changing the format or the nature of the timing of some of the products they deliver. That's really what we're trying to get at. It's nobody's committing to anything. This is this is just kind of the early, how do we work together to co-develop products that are going to be beneficial. So with that, why don't we go ahead? I think the two perspectives that are here that are really important, again, are people that sit on some of these committees to understand how these committees operate, why some approaches that might make great technical sense don't always occur because there's some other considerations that have to kind of come into play. Most of these most influential ASCE standards are completed under an ANSI standard development process, which means you have to have different perspectives on the committee. You have to have different affected communities. They have to agree on the standard. So, it's more than just making the strictest technical argument. There's other considerations that we may not be knowledgeable of. So it's that process that we're trying to understand. So Joe Barsugli, he's been working in this space for quite a while. He was one of the first people that we invited in when the Committee on Adaptation to a Changing Climate began in 2011. He's also serves on the ASCE chapter 32, the ASCE Standard 32, which is design of frost-proof foundations. So he's kind of represents both worlds here, the producer, data producer, and at least one authoring committee that might potentially use that data. So Joe, with that overly long-winded discussion, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Yeah. Hey, Dan. I didn't know whether you wanted me to show slides or just talk through things.
Slides is always good if you think they're helpful.
I didn't quite know what the format would be. I've got 10. I limited myself to 10. So I will bring up my let me see.
And Megan, what did we give Joe? 20 minutes?
Well, we'll just play it by ear. It won't be. I'm sure we'll have plenty of time for discussion.
It's 15 minutes. 15 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Megan.
Hey, then 10 slides is probably the right thing to do. I'm just going to walk you through this work that I've been doing largely under this Climate Program Office of NOAA grant and through my affiliation with NOAA, but also my official position at the University of Colorado at Boulder. And I'm just going to walk you through four things. But what we've been doing is developing, or at least, adapting a non-stationary spatial statistical framework that we can use for multiple purposes. I want to talk a little bit about the projection framework we're planning on using. I really have not gotten into doing analysis of projections in any detail at the moment. I've been focusing on the historical non-stationary analysis, which forms the basis really for going forwards. Talked a little bit about air freezing index, which is part of ASCE-32, as I am on the committee, although that committee's for various reasons gotten off to a slow start because of various reasons. But we have a air freezing index subcommittee of the four, of which Steve is on that committee as well. And I've been doing work on that. I'm going to focus most on that, and a little bit on the daily temperature, intensity, duration, frequency, which is the second part of what we're going to be delivering on this proposal. So I'm just going to go through this very quickly, but there's a spatial statistical framework called Generalized Additive Models. It's basically a way to aggregate spatial information. It's kind of like what they used to call regionalization, meaning you would think that with similar physical conditions, you have similar extreme value parameters that may vary with some sort of linear or proportional relationship with, say, elevation. It might be actually similar in a region, so you can do some sort of spatial smoothing. So it's basically a kind of a conceptual smoother, but it's really quite rigorous, and there's wonderful packages for that called EVGAM, and this is a book that talks about that, that talks about this method. It's fairly sophisticated, but it also is very flexible. And so we're going to be using global mean surface temperature as our temporal covariate during the historical period and in the models, also called global warming level, always now being called global temperature index. You can do other spatial covariates like elevation. You can do a smoother that we're going to be using based on work that was done in this paper that I've taken an excerpt from the bottom, which is sort of our model for how we're doing temperature extreme value analysis using this. And you can just it's very simple to add in other covariates. Like in Alaska, we know that Pacific decadal oscillation is very important for temperature extremes, causes a lot of variance. You can sort of take that into account by adding that in and experiment with it. So it's extremely wonderful, flexible framework, but maybe it's almost too flexible. So having the guides of the literature that's done this is really useful. Right now, we're using generalized extreme value framework for the block maxima of temperature. We're also using GeV for the air freezing index, even though that's not really a block maximum problem. Just using it as a very flexible distribution fit. And it has built-in cross-validation, which I love. So open source, it's Python, it's R, the statistical language R, but we're calling it from Python. So we're just basically doing everything in things in code that can be shared and with free available software. The projection framework has always been one about basing it on observations, basing it on a really sound non-stationary analysis of observations, and then extrapolating the parameters of our extreme values from those historical estimates into the future. Either extrapolating or using model-based ensembles to get a sense of whether the location, which is sort of a mean shift, the scale-like parameters, which talks about shifts in variance, whether those change into the future. Because variance changes can either cancel out or exacerbate extreme changes, if in the tails of the distribution. I just have been in conversation with Ken Kunkel to find out what they're actually, have settled on for the Atlas 15 Volume 2. This was kind of said, this proposal was settled as kind of like at least for the temperature heat extremes, as an Atlas 15 Volume 2 for temperature, basically following similar ideas of return periods, similar ideas of how climate models will be handled in terms of ensembles. The priorities here in this analysis are to do the historical non-stationary analysis. That's really what we've spent most of our time on. Validation of data sets, quality control of data sets. Then and using this global mean surface temperature or global temperature index as a covariate. And then the next priority of that will be near-term projections, where we're more certain that we have less ensemble, less variance in the ensembles, and more consistency in the direction things are going. That's another reference I have down there for how you actually combine parametric kind of approach to combine models and observations. So where are we on air freezing index? Air freezing index is an annual value that's computed something like the anomaly temperature above or below freezing integrated, accumulated during the quote freezing period, which is gotten through various methods, but we're using this US method, we're using this one inflection point method, but that's not so important as the fact that you have one annual value. The flip side of air freezing index is air thawing index, which is flip side of it as you imagine the like degree days over 0 Celsius, but not quite. So there's various nuances of the definitions. The use case, as Dan mentioned, is frost protected shallow foundation. Explicit use case is there's a relationship between frost penetration into the ground in winter and this air freezing index. Use the 100-year or 1% annual incidence value, and that is a design value in many circumstances. If you look at ASCE 32, being on the committee, it's actually very, the precision is not needed to be very high. It's just several categories that of air freezing, this air freezing index value that determine different R values for different circumstances. So again, you don't need to down to the decimal place, don't even down into the small values, but you do need to have a general sense of within fairly large blocks of that. So it's always important to know what the precision is needed in these things. So where are we on this? I mean, we have annual time series computed for station data for Alaska. I wasn't going to do station data for this. It wasn't proposed, but talking to the engineers, it's very clear that we have to do the station data. We've done that, quality controlled most of the available stations in Alaska, computed annual air freezing index. We're using the ERA5, the European reanalysis of data, 1940 to present, for all of North America. We're also using the 4-kilometer incline grid for CONUS. And again, the GFDL SPEAR ensemble, we have a couple ensemble member climate model ensembles that we're looking at too. And again, the idea is to get a sense from the climate models. Is it a mean shift? Is it a shift in variance? How does this map to things like extreme value parameters? We have done the extreme value analysis at least for the GEV analysis, because again, it's not an annual block maximum, it's just an annual value for all of North America for ERA5 that I will show a little bit here. More important thing, I guess, from this point of view is that we're talking about what sort of auxiliary information you need and what kind of metadata you need. And this is just a sample of what we're looking at for the station data, but also we do this for the grids for the most part. What kind of metadata you need to serve with it. And it's interesting that Chris Anderson mentioned that because, of course, he sent me his requirements report, and I have in here engineering information type, which is one of his lists of a desire for a description of what this the requirements that engineers might have for this. Again, the usual kind of metadata sources. We also have netcdf files, and of course, once you have that, you can really convert it to a lot of other formats. So open for discussion of what might be useful as far as data formats for like grids and extended data that might be fairly large file. Things like from this data, we will calculate the extreme values. So let me show you an example of the gridded version here. This is the reanalysis. We have various return levels that we've computed, 2, 5, 10, 20, 50, and 100. And of course, we have a dependence on the observed global warming level, but that you can map that to actual years. And so this shows the 50-year return level for all of North America for for 1941, the beginning of the ERA5 reanalysis, and 2025. And of course, because global warming didn't happen all that strongly until the late 70s and 80s, that 1941 value was pretty good for that whole early period. as you can see that it's actually changed, but you can see because of in this large area in the east, you're not having as large a change as you might expect just from a mean shift because we're taking into account shifts in the variance as well. I want to show very quickly here. So this for our sanity check, we're actually using a point value from this extremes package which came out of NCAR to do extreme value analysis. And you can see it's fairly noisy in many places throughout here. And especially when you get something called the shape parameter, which determines whether it's a short-tailed or a long-tailed distribution. You see a fair amount of noise. When you do this sort of smoothing using this extreme value generalized additive model, you see that you actually get sort of a smoother field that is actually aggregating some of the noisy data. It takes a fair amount of experimentation to get the smoothing to the right level. And yes, yes, if you look at this big blue dot here in the just north of the Black Hills, that's in the raw data. So that's not an artifact. That's actually, when you look in the data, you find that. I don't know what's going on there, honestly. Again, Alaska. This just shows, should have put this down lower. This is actually daily maximum temperature. So not the freezing index, but the 100-year return level of daily maximum temperature. Again, for our 1941 estimate and a 2025 estimate. So again, this framework can be applied to anything with a distribution, honestly. I guess I just wanted to leave it at that. Oh, I guess I skipped over the critical slide here. Use cases for temperature idea. So there is this odd use case in the automated people mover standard, which talks about break temperatures and stuff like that, where they want the 50-year return period, the 2% AEP daily maximum temperature. Gotten explicitly through ASHRAE methods from their ASHRAE handbook, which means it's a jumble distribution. This, of course, will serve as giving a 50-year AEP. It may not be the Gumbel distribution. There may be different. There may be a different type of extreme value distribution that comes with it, but it would certainly serve that purpose. The other side of this proposal was to work with the heat health community again on temperature. Now, temperature is only one piece of information that heat health community uses, and there are many, many different indices and many, many different multivariate indices that take into account moisture and solar exposure, UTCI, and all these, this really would serve as just sort of a general, informative kind of value, and it might be very useful in areas where there's not a lot of moisture, for example, the Western U.S., where you don't have where the heat index is fairly follows temperature primarily in most cases, many cases. But again, it's not pretending to be to meet all the needs. An interesting use case that came across my plate is that the coldest hour of the day is also used in natural gas distribution network sizing. So that's coldest T-min temperature. So the flip side of the daily maximum temperature is the wintertime cold T-mins. And of course, ASHRAE uses a lot for building, heating, cooling analysis. They have an entire suite of temperature, moisture, and other indices. Not really something I'm interested in doing here because they've got that. At least they've been working on that. My latest understanding is using the ERA5 reanalysis. So the latest cut, moving average for the number of days, although we could try to develop something about days over threshold. Again, a GEV analysis, but I do want to move on to the peaks over threshold analysis for those familiar with it and some other ways of looking at it. But to get something out the door, we'll start with the block maximum and looking at total temperature, not anomalous temperature to begin with. So that's where we are on that. Again, we started to apply it, but we just don't have a lot more to show than what I wanted to show there.
And
so that's
Joe,
where we are on this.
Yep, yeah. You're pretty close there, Joe.
I'm done.
Okay, finish your thought, and then we'll go.
My thought is, that is my thought that we have sort of two sides to this: the air freezing index, which is an annual number, and the duration, daily to multi-day duration. extreme value analysis for based on daily temperature.
All right, thank you, Joe. All right, so questions for Joe. Other programs free, feel free to explore differences or similarities to what Joe's been doing for the user community. Chime in, ask, kick the tires, try to follow some of the assumptions and processes. We're just here to learn together. So who wants to get us started? If you put your hand up electronically, I would appreciate it. Bilal, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. I thought to get things started here. The generalized additive models that are being used, they are basically you have space and time, and they are some form of linear regression to some extent. The fundamental principles in statistics, and I know you are dealing with extreme value. But what you get is the best estimate of the extreme value. So are you looking at, I was wondering about the level of the standard error of estimate and the bounds around it. And would it be extreme value with confidence intervals? I don't know what's the level of variability in that. Thank you.
So first of all, the generalized additive model, it's based on, it's actually smooth nonlinear regression. You're regressing against a set of basis functions that are nonlinear functions, right? So it's not the problem with the extremes data. The extremes is purely linear regression, but the generalized the GAM framework basically allows nonlinear relationships to take place in this, and smooth cross-validated, so you basically get something that the data says is reasonable given the sampling. Yes, the confidence intervals, the reason we did this parallel analysis using pointwise analysis is because once you start aggregating, confidence intervals become overconfident. Let's put it this way. So we're trying to develop just a Monte Carlo method using pointwise to sort of make sure that we're not doing anything strange when we do conferences. We do have confidence intervals. I just didn't show those here. That actually took quite some time to trust the framework to do this because of spatial autocorrelation, basically. So yes.
Actually, that was another point I wanted to ask, which is in statistics we assume the points to be independent. How would you deal with the spatial as well as temporal, autocorrelation to some extent?
No, you don't have to assume that they're independent. In statistics, you don't have to assume that they're independent, and that's why Monte Carlo estimates really are your kind of friend when you have autocorrelations and you don't have a good mathematical model of what those autocorrelations are. Especially when you're doing sort of these kind of complicated statistical fits. It does actually build in a confidence interval that tries to take into account autocorrelations, what they call their sandwich method, where there's a sensitivity analysis that they build in. I don't want to go into more details. It turns out that that's not quite accurate when you compare it to a purely Monte Carlo method. That's the answer. The short answer is Monte Carlo. Just pretend you have smaller samples of the same stuff, and you see what you get. So that's to be blunt about that. But it is hard to do confidence intervals. It's hard to get people to look at confidence intervals for extreme value analysis, quite honestly, because they tend to be large. That's why I did the spatial smoothing, so you can try to reduce the confidence interval size. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Brennan, go ahead.
Thanks for this, Joe. We talked before, so I'd had a preview of this. And so my question's more speculative and just thinking about some of the challenges I've been facing when we think about moving to like a a future climate projection, and we talk about methods for debiasing those products, and oftentimes, from what I can tell, not as a climate scientist, but as a statistician, that we're debiasing, in the average. And so I get worried when we have a issue like what you faced, where we have these nonlinear thresholds, like it's freezing above a temperature and it's not, well, it's freezing below a temperature and it's not freezing above. And so getting that right in the extreme really matters, because even if we're off by a degree, it's going to totally change things. So how would you approach handling a future climate projection that's been debiased in the mean, but you're interested in the extreme, and making sure that when you have a threshold like air freezing index, that you get that right? Do you have any just general thoughts on how to do it?
So maybe this was hidden because I went through very quickly, but the explicit reason I chose to do this, basically a kind of a delta method, if you like, where you start with the historical analysis. And the historical analysis is the historical analysis. It's not, it's as unbiased as you can make that. I mean, there's obviously observational biases and stuff. You start with that, and then you perturb the parameters of your fit based on the deltas of the parameters in the models. So you would be actually asking for the sensitivities in the models to be wrong, but that's hard to tell because you're going out into the future. So you get, by staying anchored in observations and not using downscale climate model data for these thresholdy things, because you can do quantile mapping. I mean, there's quantile delta mapping that Alex Cannon has done. Multivariate quantile delta mapping, probably your best bet if you wanted to do something like that. Canadians are doing that, using that. That's how I would do it if I was to use the models directly. But I'm not using the models directly. I'm using them to get a sense of whether mean shifts and variance is happening in the models, what the magnitude of that is, and then mapping that back onto observations as a time-dependent feature. So it kind of builds in a very conservative approach. We'll see how it works. There's the paper, the rebase and paper that I can send that to you, is basically that kind of approach, although they wrap it in a bunch of Bayesian analysis. But that's basically what they do as well.
Sure, thank you.
I don't know if that makes sense. But basically, the short answer is I'm using a delta method, but not just a delta method in the values. Although there is literature that says delta methods in the return periods works okay in many respects. So I'm going to look at that as well.
Cool, thank you.
All right, thank you both. All right, we have kind of a tight schedule. What I'm hoping is that you're thinking about some of these questions. We have 25 minutes at the end of the call, or a good 25 or 30 minutes. So, some of these questions should probably be asked multiple times to different groups so that we can understand some of the differences in the products. So if you continue to think about those questions and be ready at, especially for questions for Joe again at 1:30 or 12:30. Thank you. All right, so moving on. Next we have Maggie Allen of NOAA's National Integrated Heat Health Information System. Maggie, go ahead. You've got 15 minutes, and then we'll have 10 minutes for discussion.
Okay, great. I'm just gonna take over screen sharing in a minute. So let's see if this works.
Seems to be.
Okay, can you see that?
Yep. And
Okay.
Maggie, are you going to be able to stay for till 12:10, or do you need to jump
I can
off
stay for
first?
12:10. Yeah, that's
Okay,
fine.
all right.
Hold on, let me just
We're in your hands.
okay. Let me see if I can okay. So you can see all of that, right? Cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right, perfect. Yeah, so thank you so much for having me. Like you said, Maggie Allen, I'm a Climate Health Program Policy Manager for NOAA's Climate Program Office. So I work for the National Integrated Heat Health Information System. And yeah, today I'll just be talking about a variety of hopefully relevant extreme heat tools and programs we have out of NOAA and across NIAS as well. So hopefully some of these will be relevant for you all, kind of building off the discussion we just heard of TIDF as well. So I don't really probably need to state this for you all, but just to kind of start with the problem here is that heat is a present and growing risk. Last year, heat conditions saw large parts of the US under active heat advisories, watches, and warnings. And as you can see in this below slide, the Weather Service is issuing more heat alerts year after year. Heat kills an average of over 1,200 people every year in the US, and that's probably a gross underestimate. Maricopa County in Arizona alone had over 600 heat-related deaths in 2024 and 2023. So as you can see here, the largest heat mortality rates by urbanization level in the US is in a large central metro. Rural areas are also very vulnerable to heat. And as you can see on the right side, workplace injuries are also really high due to heat. Trade, transportation, utility sectors in particular are very vulnerable. In this slide, it shows how many days, how many workplace injuries have required at least one day away from work from environmental heat exposure. And so extreme heat obviously affects everyone, but not everyone experiences it the same. We have a list of a lot of at-risk groups to heat. So older adults and children under 5 are particularly at risk to heat-related illness, those with pre-existing health conditions and people with disabilities and chronic health conditions, as well as mental health conditions, certain medications, which we'll talk about in a minute, substance misuse, those who have certain living conditions or lack access to air conditioning, including those that are experiencing homelessness, low socioeconomic status, outdoor and indoor workers, so various workplace conditions and settings, folks who live alone or in isolation, pets and service animals and support animals, people who are pregnant, athletes, emergency responders, as well as another issue is those who can't maybe communicate well that their body temperature is rising, so language barriers. So I just wanted to include this slide because I think it's an interesting slide that not a lot of people know about. I didn't know about all these medications that may interact with heat when I joined this office, so this is just a really good thing to know. So some psychotropic medications can interfere with a person's ability to regulate their heat and their awareness that their body temperature is rising, which is associated with injury and death. So most antidepressants, anticholinergics like Benadryl, central nervous system stimulants like Adderall, heart medications, antipsychotics, insulin, heat damages insulin, so it makes it less effective, and of course, alcohol and cocaine. They've seen an 8% increase in mental health emergency department visits on hot days. Suicides increase when temperature goes up. They've seen a 4.5% increase in risk of dementia admission per 1 degree Celsius increase above 17 degrees Celsius in England. And when nights get over 86 degrees Fahrenheit, they've seen that sleep declines by 14 minutes on average, which of course impacts person's mental and physical health as well. So heat risk extends beyond mortality. You can see in these slides how heat risk is affecting economic loss. So on the left, you see a daily electricity load versus temperature in Texas of May and June in 2019 and 2023. And on the right, you see the total attributable economic losses from 7 recent heat events in California. So the demand for cooling increases and is higher on hotter days when efficiency of transmission is also lower. And so overall, they estimate that heat-driven reduction in labor productivity costs the U.S. economy an estimated $200 billion a year. And of course, that's just an estimate. So that's a 46% increase in costs since 2001. Southern and rural areas, as you can see in the slide, are hit particularly hard. These regions face the highest relative losses that often exceed about 4% of the local GDP. And construction and transportation are some of the most effective industries. Outdoor and heat intensive industries are the most exposed, but even traditionally heat indoor sectors are showing rising losses. So hopefully that if we keep doing work with this and can make better models, this will hopefully lead to better policy, and regionally adaptive models can show these gaps and relative economic loss, which can hopefully show economic risk and lead to policy addressing this. So again, I won't go into too much of this today, but I just wanted to kind of preface that it's really difficult to reduce heat risk, which you're probably aware of because heat has been overlooked for a long time and is not really reflected very well in policy and governance structures across government. Heat impacts are, of course, more invisible than other natural hazard impacts. They're often delayed or poorly quantified due to lacking impact data and studies. Many communities don't have heat action plans or they haven't tested these plans, and communities overall need guidance, evidence, and support to take effective action on heat. So as I mentioned, I work for the National Integrated Heat Health Information System, or NIAS, and you might be familiar with this, but this is a federal response to address some of this heat risk problem. So it was launched in 2015 by NOAA and the CDC to have a coordinated approach across the federal government to heat resilience. We work across disciplines, governmental agencies, and non-governmental partners, as well as across timescales to bridge long-term heat risk reduction and preparedness. So a few years ago, we were probably at the most federal agencies involved we've ever had. As you can see here, these are a variety of agencies who've been involved. It has declined over the last year and a half or so, but we still have a pretty active member network, and we still are going pretty strong. So the membership does fluctuate, but we still meet regularly, and we host a lot of things, which I'll get to in a minute. So again, you might be familiar with this, but one of the best ways we communicate about heat risk here as part of NIAS is through heat.gov. And that is the premier source of information for the country to reduce the health, economic, and infrastructural impacts of extreme heat. Late last year, I believe we updated the site. So if you haven't been there in a while, check it out. It has new heat safety resources and a more user-friendly design. And one of the things that the NOAA has done recently to address heat risk, and again, you're probably familiar with this, and this is kind of going into other presentations, but the Weather Service put out a tool called HeatRisk last year, which takes the forecasted temperatures and puts it into the context of how abnormally hot the forecast is, and if heat poses a risk to human health. So with heat risk, there are 5 categories to depict how impactful the heat will be and to whom, which is especially useful for populations at higher risk to heat health impacts that I already mentioned. So the current version of HeatRisk tool stems from a collaboration between the Weather Service and the CDC, so it marries weather and climate data with CDC heat mortality data. And it's meant to be supplementary to the official Weather Service heat watches, warnings, and advisories, providing guidance for decision makers and those who are sensitive to heat. And then very recently, we have a brand new probabilistic heat risk prototype that provides additional context into this heat risk forecast. It shows the likelihood of being at or above each heat risk category. As you can see on this slide, the orange shading on the map indicates the probability of a forecast being at least moderate, with the highest likelihood centered along the mid-Atlantic coast. So users can toggle between the different categories and can see probabilistic forecasts out to 10 days. So if you click on the specific location, you can pull up the official 7-day forecast in the bottom table and see charts depicting the 10-day probabilities for that specific location. And if you have more detailed questions about this, Barb on the call is able to answer them as kind of our Weather Service expert and liaison. So if you have more questions, please direct them to Barb, but I'm happy to help answer it if I can as well. But I did want to talk today in the rest of the time I have about some more heat activities, particularly our grant with Duke University. And hopefully this is relevant for you all as civil engineers. So for the last year and a half, we've been funding Duke's Heat Policy Innovation Hub, which maps the economic impacts of heat on industries, particularly energy, health, transportation, agriculture, housing, and labor. So they work to provide decision makers with localized information on heat impacts to these sectors, and the information is offered to the public through their various interactive web-based tools and educational briefs that show the heat impacts in communities, particularly in rural and coastal communities, since those communities are understudied. The hub brings together scientists and communities to develop and deploy policies and solutions to extreme heat and health issues. They've been conducting interviews and roundtables with private sector and affected groups to better understand heat impacts in these areas. And they've been providing recommendations for decision makers to address these risks. So they're really about cross-sector collaboration in this project. And if you do that QR code, you can go to their website. They've done a lot of different story maps and reports, but the one I want to focus on today for you all is their work on bridges. So they published a story map and report recently called The Hidden Cost of Heat Impacts to Bridges. With more frequent and intense heat waves, infrastructure designed for milder conditions is being stressed beyond its capacity. So there are more maintenance demands and limited effectiveness of mitigation measures. So this work on bridges and their story map shows a lot of really important key talking points about bridges. As you can see here, they talk about how movable bridges are especially vulnerable. They also mention that bridges with older expansion joints that weren't designed for today's heat are very vulnerable. And they also point out that 5,800 bridges across the US are in substandard condition. So in the story map, you can dive deeper and look at the bridges within each congressional district and which ones are most vulnerable and least resilient. And they kind of dive into that. So you can click around. I won't have time today to go into that, but we'll share the link to the story map in the chat probably after this, and you can explore that. They show that there is a need for more maintenance, such as active cooling systems or sensor-triggered spray mechanisms on movable bridges because of the increased structural stress and faster material degradation. Their studies also recommend that new projects should be engineered for a wider range of temperature variability over its full lifespan. So again, I'll share that in the chat after this. And so really quickly, just with the few minutes I have left, I just wanted to point out some other things we've been doing for a while. You might be aware of our urban heat island mapping campaigns that we've been doing for, well, since 2017, basically. We've mapped over 90 communities across the US and various communities and cities around the world as well. These build upon local partnerships to learn how heat is distributed, where citizen scientists go around and map their communities to show where it's hottest and link that to various and try to make sure that is addressed in future heat action planning. So past campaigns have informed city sustainability plans, public health practices, urban forestry plans, grant making, research projects. And so you can also go onto heat.gov and look at all the various mapping campaigns we've had. They all have their own reports. We also have a page on how to develop your own heat action plan or run your own heat tabletop exercise. We've supported over 15 communities across the US on heat tabletop exercises, which are simulations that test responses to emergency situations in an informal environment. The tabletop exercises we've supported have brought together federal agencies, state and local governments, community-based organizations, and more. And we've really focused on both the long-term risk mitigation to heat as well as short-term response. And we hope to keep doing these. And so on heat.gov, you can also access a lot of reports on how to run your own heat tabletop exercise, how to build heat governance, and best practices for heat tabletop exercises as well. So I just wanted to show that we have been able to support all of these exercises across the country, both in the form of a challenge competition and through direct support. Our most recent one was in Raleigh, North Carolina in March. And so like I said, we hope to keep doing these as well. And I think I have like 1 minute left, so I did just want to point out, because it's this week, it's actually tomorrow. If you're interested, we have a heat season warm-up workshop that is 2 days, and it's virtual and free for everyone. It's focused on heat safety for athletes, spectators, and workers or volunteers at outdoor events. So like I said, it does start tomorrow at noon Eastern. It's on Zoom, and then it continues into the next day from 12 to 4:30 as well. So I will put the link into the chat for that as well if you'd like to register. And then we also have an ongoing webinar series as well on heat research. Our next one is on May 21st. So you can also scan that QR code to sign up for that. The next one will be focused on urban heat solutions. This will be a variety of folks who we've supported at NOAA through research partnerships and grants at Arizona University's Desert Research Institute and the University of Texas at Austin. So they'll be talking about actionable solutions to heat and urban environments. And then finally, if you're a social media person and want to know about this, we have our Heat Safety Week coming up May 18th to 22nd. So if you follow along with the hashtag Heat Safety, you can, just kind of follow along each day and learn about heat, and various other cities and local governments and community-based organizations, I believe, are also participating in this heat safety event. So follow along that if you'd like to be on social media. And with that, yeah, that was a really quick overview of everything we're up to. Hopefully some of it was helpful for you all. Like I said, go on heat.gov, learn more about everything I mentioned, sign up for a newsletter, or follow us on Twitter. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Maggie. Who wants to start here with questions for Maggie? I guess I will. I mean, I think, Maggie, your program shows that, is kind of emblematic of some of the challenges that we have here. We're looking for different sources of data to support civil engineering design. Obviously, with heat index, it's really more of a near-term forecast. How far out are you basically, how far out do your products look? I mean, do you have a 30-year forecast, for example?
Well, I know the Weather Service looks generally out 7 to 10 days, and I know that that's when we're doing like tabletop exercise, for example, we look more at 7 to 10 days. In terms of 30 days, I believe there have been
I would
predictions. I
say
don't know,
30 years.
30 years,
Engineering
right?
design is
30
like 30
years.
years.
Right,
So
right. Barb, are you able to know about that with the Weather Service or climate prediction? I know Climate Prediction Center does things like that. Do you know about if they have 30-year predictions?
They don't have anything going out quite that far. That level
Yeah.
of projections is something that might come more from our laboratories that support with research, as opposed to the Weather Service's predictions, which are generally what we call subseasonal to seasonal. I do know that climate research is investigating some of those longer term heat projections.
Yep.
And yeah, I could probably put you in touch with folks who are doing that kind of work if you'd like to hear more from them at a future meeting.
well, I think that's probably why Amanda has her hand up.
Yeah, I
So
was gonna say, I know that we often talk about like the different scenarios, and when we talk about, how hot a city will be, how many days over 90 it will be experiencing, we often look at it at the different scenarios of like doing nothing, addressing climate in various ways. And so I have seen presentations talk about that, like predicting how many days over 90 there will be based off the future climate scenarios.
all right.
So go ahead,
Amanda,
Amanda.
please go ahead.
Yeah, just coming in here, I think for the time scale that is relevant here, and I apologize, I don't know why my camera's not working today, but so goes it. GFDL and SPEAR model is really kind of the sweet spot for that. However, I do think that NIHIS's IDF work, the IDF work, is relevant at that time scale because we're, similar to what we've been trying to do with precip IDF curves. We're trying to, in the long term, move towards figuring out what temperature, intensity, duration, frequency would look like long term. So I do want to point back to Maggie and Barb and say that because you used the word prediction, they might not have integrated that, but I do think it is a relevant tool. So thanks.
Thanks, Amanda.
Other questions? Bilal, please.
Yes, thank you so much. I think it's interesting how this area has to cut through many fields and disciplines and so on, and I do appreciate that very much. And my question, and this is health effects, economic, infrastructure, demographics, and the list goes on and on. And the question, it looks to me, it's almost ideal for AI because it could be that there are even some pursuits that are not obvious or some risks or opportunities in terms of dealing with the heat that will not be obvious without in-depth examining across those fields in the same manner. Any thoughts on that or any efforts in that direction?
Sorry, can you repeat the question of
The
like,
question is
yeah.
there any effort going in the use of AI related to heat?
I'm not very familiar with AI, with what might we be doing in AI. We are doing a lot of work, I think, in wildfire prediction with AI, or there might be a funding opportunity coming out with AI and wildfire prediction. But Barb, I'm not very AI knowledgeable what might be going on there.
Yeah, you're right that we're hoping to get a pot of potential funding to support the use of AI in a number of areas, but heat is one of them. And we are still waiting for our budget news to know when that's going to come out. But for activities that are ongoing, to my knowledge, anything that has been going on has been on a smaller scale, but hoping to scale up, that folks are exploring how things can be used and applying that using our new AI capabilities with models, with our forecast models. That would be for scopes in the nearer term. As far as the longer term, that's also something I don't know and I'm not aware of right now. Joe is raising his hand like he might have an answer.
Right, but Joe, before you go, let me, I just want to, because this is where I think part of the discussion is, from our perspective, we are looking for federal programs or other sources of data that could be used in engineering design. And so how would we go about evaluating the underlying products that NIHIS is developing so that we can say whether that's a better fit than what, for example, Joe might be producing or some other source? We're trying to put ourselves in the position of these authoring committees that are trying to find data about future conditions and then which sources should they use. So if we wanted more of a technical dive on like the statistical analyses like Joe was talking about, can you point us to the right people? Or Joe, are you already in communication with them?
Yes. So the answer is yes to that. I can help point to it, and Joe can as well, but we do have a team from CPC who are a team of folks who are working on developing those heat-related IDF curves. And they have been coordinating with Joe and touching base with both the technical details of how they are calculating these metrics and also the applications and presentation of them, because it's not just how they calculate it, but also how do we get that to folks in a manner that is useful. And that's an area where we're still actively looking for feedback from users like the folks on this call. We do want to know how you would like to see this information presented. How would it be most useful to you to be presented?
Okay, thank you, Maggie. Joe, go ahead, please.
I want to be very quick.
Stepped on you there.
No. I wanted to be very quick. I didn't want to. I mean, I knew you. I figured you'd mentioned that. And to Bilal's point, you could say AI, but really, I mean, what I'm beginning to do is in what we call machine learning, which is kind of a part of the spectrum of AI. And I do think more sophisticated machine learning aspects of AI, as opposed to like large language models, would be the way to go. And I think there's many possible applications when you have these complex data arrays for that. As far as the heat indices go, of course, you often need things like solar radiation, you need things like wind, you need things like humidity, which are much more difficult to project than temperature itself. And so it becomes a complicated, more delicate issue, I would say, physically. But I think certainly tractable people have done that. You can download other data sets that have some common indices that have been projected in climate models. But doing it in a way that really grounds it in observational trends is, I think, the most important aspect of it.
All right, thank you. All right, Maggie, Barbara, thank you both.
Thank
any
you.
other questions?
I put in the chat some of the links. You all asked about it. And like Barb and I said, the notice of funding opportunity on AI is still somewhere in waiting, but we will share it when it becomes available.
Why don't you take a moment and introduce yourself, since you weren't on right when we started, as I recall.
Sure. So my name is David Cowan. I'm a manager for a stormwater group down in South Florida, based out of West Palm Beach. The company I work for is Baxter and Woodman, which is based out of Illinois. And we have offices in Illinois, Wisconsin, Texas, and Florida. So kind of a good kind of variety of different temperature climates and stuff like that with relation to this topic. And I've worked in utilities, civil design, water resources for the past 20 years.
All right, thanks. All right, so it's 12:20. I want to go ahead. I misquoted the agenda, so I've already we're 5 minutes behind. We'll give Jordan and Tom their full allotment, obviously. But again, think about this from the perspective of, don't hesitate to ask questions about your use case, of these different programs, because I think the more they hear the questions from us and what we're wrestling with, the better they can think about, like, is that something that they could see their program trying to address? And it might be as simple as, hey, we're struggling with going from station data to gridded data so we can incorporate projections, or other, fairly significant but kind of simple concepts. So be thinking about that as an ASCE member in these, and when we get to our chance to react. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jordan. Are you flying the plane, Jordan, or?
Yes, I am flying the plane, so I will steal the screen share.
Now, just while we're talking here, Jordan and Tom have joined us for a variety of different discussions across ASCE, introducing us to the Climber portal, et cetera, and some of the work they're doing. But I think it's an example of, it takes a few conversations for these very diverse groups to begin to kind of center around some common terminology and understanding the problems and the use cases that we're trying to collectively address. So I appreciate the time Jordan, that you and Tom have put into it, and I'll turn it over to you.
Sounds good. I'm not seeing the little red box. So are you seeing a slide deck that says downscaling
I
future
see
scenarios?
a slide deck. I
Awesome.
see a slide deck. Yep.
Good. That's the first key step. Okay. Well, thanks for having us today. Again, my name is Jordan Branham, and I'm joined by Tom Wall. So I'll get us started. I do have some slides. I'm going to try to go through these relatively quickly, but I added in or kept some additional ones in there just in case questions came up. Tom, general comment. Feel free to jump in if I miss anything or if you want to clarify anything as we go. So. But with that said, just a little bit of background about ClimR, and I want to talk about two heat-related efforts that are underway or were recently completed. So ClimR is really the outgrowth of years of engagement and work alongside and for power utilities. So obviously, as a DOE-affiliated national lab, power utilities are a key point of emphasis. And so we've worked with, at this point, several dozen utilities everywhere from multi-state IOUs down to municipal utilities, rural electric cooperatives. So kind of the whole gamut. But then we also do a lot of work with other infrastructure owners and operators and critical infrastructure, as Tom had mentioned earlier. And really, it's the outgrowth of that engagement that over time we were working with a lot of utilities and a lot of infrastructure owners and operators to take large amounts of data, climate model outputs, and boil it down to something that was useful for a given specific use case. And over time, there was the realization of, hey, why don't we try to create something where we can get more of this information out there and available to anybody with access to the internet, as opposed to just for targeted specific use cases, because a lot of this information is, of course, useful across many different applications and many different users, and not just a given user in a given state or in a given region. So one of those infrastructure owners and operators that we worked with was AT&T, as you see on the screen, and they are an important partner in this effort, along with the Department of Energy as well, and then of course Argonne. And FEMA was also a big partner in launching the ClimR portal. Had to back away a little bit ago, but was also critical in kind of shaping this emphasis across both infrastructure owners and operators, as well as emergency managers and decision makers writ large across state, local, tribal, territorial governments. So I'll do this briefly, but big picture, the data that ends up on ClimR starts with an effort to downscale several global climate models, and this actually started off, I think, close to a decade ago. Is when this process really kicked off. So use a dynamical downscaling approach and downscale 3 different GCMs in the CMIP-5 runs. This is really only possible because of the supercomputing available at Argonne, which has made this work feasible and allowed us the opportunity to run these models across a pretty large North American domain. That obviously covers all of the lower 48 states, covers most of Alaska, and then a good chunk of Canada and Mexico as well. ClimR is oriented towards coverage in the U.S. states, but that data does exist elsewhere. And then we focus on 3 different time frames: a historical, a mid-century, end-of-century time period. Those are 10-year time periods, as you can see on the screen. The raw data is at a 3-hourly temporal resolution, and then we model for the mid-century and end-of-century scenarios. We model 2 different emissions pathways, so RCP 8.5 and then RCP 4.5. So most of the work that we've done to date has involved this 12-kilometer downscale data. We are currently running and are getting really close to the finish line for a historical and mid-century period, running the next generation using the CMIP-6 setup and downscaling down to a 4-kilometer spatial resolution with a 1-hourly temporal resolution, and then also using 20-year time periods instead of 10-year time periods. So we're really excited about this for a number of different reasons. It resolves convection at that scale, so we're able to actually track and model individual storms, but then also using 20-year time periods will hopefully give us more confidence in projecting out extremes, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means for return periods later in the presentation. So I'll skip over this. This is just another image of what that kind of downscaling process looks like, and here's heat index data at end of century. So I want to talk, there's a lot of different variables up on ClimR. We kind of started with the basics, temperature, precipitation, some heat index information, and have progressively added more variables based on our engagements, again, with utilities and other infrastructure owners and operators. One of those outputs was an evaluation of wet bulb globe temperature. So for those that are not familiar, wet bulb globe temperature involves using temperature, humidity, so similar to heat index, relying on temperature and humidity, but then also adding in wind speed and solar irradiance. Wind speed, of course, greater winds can act as a cooling factor on the body, and then solar irradiance, greater exposure to sunlight can, of course, increase heat stress on the human body. So this has been used for a long time by OSHA, NIOSH, other organizations to try to better capture heat stress, environmental heat stress. And so we essentially modeled wet bulb globe temperature, calculated it for our data across those given time periods to try to better capture how wet bulb globe temperature might shift in the future. And we did some research about, what are certain common thresholds used in the literature when evaluating wet bulb globe temperature and what it means for outdoor workers. And this is just an example of that. I cut out a couple of the other ones that we looked at, including kind of some military applications as well. But ultimately, this background research had us land on a couple different outputs that have made its way up onto ClimR. So to start with, we started with your basics, calculating average monthly, seasonal, daily max wet bulb. But then we also wanted to explore the incidence of days and really like daytime hours above those thresholds that were common in the literature. So we looked at the number of days where the wet bulb globe temperature exceeded 78, 82, and 86 Fahrenheit, looked at this monthly and seasonally. And then we also looked at the number of daytime hours or an estimate of the number of daytime hours where that wet bulb exceeds those same three thresholds. And again, this was kind of informed by trying to understand what those impacts might be to outdoor workers, and it impacts restoration crews and all sorts of other outdoor work that might be impacted by greater incidence of days exceeding those thresholds. As part of this work, we also expanded our offering of heat index data. So I've listed a couple of those below, and we have a lot of days, threshold level days for the evaluation of max heat index as well. So those are up on ClimR as well. So just an example of what this looks like. We have a local projections tool on ClimR, which is essentially our one-stop shop if you want to just gain some quick access to some of these outputs. You're interested in a specific grid cell or a county or a census tract. You can go click a location and then select from our variables to actually, get the report out for what those projections show for historical and mid-century outputs. So you can see here that we have seasonal data in the table below. We also have a monthly breakdown on the left, and the monthly breakdown was particularly important for this variable because we were interested in how those non-summer shoulder months might be impacted in the future. What kind of changes do we see in May and September when we typically have less exposure to this extreme heat, but might expect to have more in the future? We also have national maps up on ClimR that are aptly named. This is where you would go to explore kind of those broad changes across all of CONUS. The specific map is mapping the change in the number of daytime hours above the 82 degrees Fahrenheit threshold. And you can see kind of clear scaffolding of patterns across the nation. The other key heat-related output that I wanted to at least give some background about today is our IDF curves for extreme heat. We are also working on IDF curves for extreme cold at the moment, but those ones are still in process. So this started with essentially taking all of those model data and calculating annual maximum intensities for a number of given durations. So you can see on the screen, I'll see if my mouse can kind of highlight this, that we calculated durations from 1 all the way up to 20 for our kind of methodological development, and evaluated the annual maximum intensity for a 1-day, 2-day, 3-day, 4-day heat wave event. We calculated these across our different time frames, and you can really see some of those different structures, those different structured relationships within those different time frames and how they vary across location. So for Chicago and New York, we see a really clear scaffolding of time frames here: historical, mid-century, end of century. Los Angeles, with its kind of different climate, shows a much different relationship. So we evaluated these shifts in these annual maxima over time. We accounted for non-stationarity using a GEV approach to model intensity, a uniform distribution to model duration, and then a copula to connect those under a joint statistical framework. Happy to talk about that more, if there are questions about the actual methodological calculation of the IDF curves. From an output standpoint, the heat data that are up on ClimRR that are about to be up on ClimRR, we calculated 5 different key return periods from the 2 up to the 50-year return period. As I mentioned, 10 years of data, 30 years of model data for a 10-year period. Put some limits on how far out we can reasonably calculate a return period. So getting out to the 100-year return period, the uncertainty estimates around that would be large enough that it wouldn't really be a useful output. So we go up to the 50-year here and might explore the 100-year with the 20-year 4-kilometer data. Ultimately, we saw use cases maxing out mostly at around the 7-day duration. So we chose to visualize up on ClimRR 1-day, 2-day, all the way to 7-day duration events. And then we also calculated uncertainty estimates around our median estimate, the 50th percentile estimate. So up on ClimRR, you can see 5th percentile, that low estimate, and then a 95th percentile for each of these frequency duration combinations. And then lastly, we will, of course, have both RCP 4.5 and RCP 8.5 data available on there as well. So want to close out here with just some example images of what these might look like. Here's an example for Rye Valley, Oregon, where you have the historical and mid-century curves. These are the median curves, and then an example of what those uncertainty estimates look like around each of those 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-day curves for historical and mid-century. And then, of course, we can also map specific frequency duration pairings across all of our model domain. So we have 2 examples here. One's the historical 6-day, 5-year return. What's the intensity there? What's the temperature intensity? And then the historical 2-day, 50-year return period. My last slide is a sneak peek image, but I figured I would just show. So this is the development site. This has not been released yet, but I did just want to give an example because it should be released in the next couple weeks of what this might look like. So a user could go in and select the time period of interest, their duration of interest, their return period of interest. Here I selected the 2-day, 5-year return period. And then if I click a given location, it'll take a second to register here. I can see a table with all of those outputs from the 1-day, 2-year, all the way to the 7-day, 50-year. It includes those 90% confidence intervals below the median estimate. And then we have this in figure form as well, which we actually calculated return periods at every year specifically to make a figure that you kind of interact at a return period of your choosing if you need something besides those that are pre-calculated here in the table. So those are our IDF and Whipple data. Tom, I'll kick it over to you to see if I missed anything before maybe we can go to some questions.
No, that's good. Thanks, Jordan.
All right. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Tom. Obviously, we want to start out with questions about the Argonne work, and then we'll just kind of transition that into a broader discussion of how the end user might be able to access this, just kind of talk about some of the engineering use cases and what the implications are. So with that, anybody have any questions for Jordan or Tom?
I had a kind of comment in terms of application, and I don't know how it necessarily might uh, fall into this, but in Florida, and then also I know in the Midwest, um, we get during the summer these temperature driven storm events that are really, the land heating up and then the kind of wet ocean air slipping underneath, causing this short duration, high intensity storm events in the summer. How do you see that this work could play into better understanding how those intensities are going to change um, over time for us in terms of managing? Those are some of our worst flooding events because they're a couple of inches in 30 minutes. So what are your thoughts in terms of this data feeding into predicting the weather prediction data?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's a couple of different items there. One is honestly the predictive modeling side is something we would love to explore a little bit more fully. So I think there's a lot of potential there. We've been really focused on kind of the release of the data itself. But one area of improvement or potential future development is kind of looking at those coincident events and the frequency and kind of return period of those coincident events. So you mentioned both heat and precipitation there as well. We have a parallel effort right now to also release IDF curves for precipitation. In the future, I could see something where we're trying to produce something looking at coincident events. And then the last thing I'll mention is just that I would be really interested to explore that kind of specific question with those 4-kilometer data, because we're able to resolve some of those, again, convective processes and explore some of those trends that are perhaps a little bit more rare across a longer model time period. So I think that might give us some more wiggle room to dig into that phenomenon.
Joe, go ahead. Joe Barsugli, go ahead. Are you on mute?
I have to hit a couple of buttons here. Yeah, so you're using WRF as the fine scale model here, correct?
Yeah.
Only WRF. And
correct. Yeah.
For some things that's good, but for land surface processes, the regional model is the one that really determines the climate, and particularly in the summertime. So I'm just concerned that one of the major sources of uncertainty, which is the model physics uncertainty, is not particularly well sampled here. So this is sort of a scenario, maybe a planning scenario, but it's, these the regional models based on like Cortex and NARCAP found that a lot of them have land surface drying or land surface biases that could affect the temperature. And I guess I don't know how you communicate those. I'm not saying it's not relevant, but I'm just saying, not saying this one model is not relevant, but I'm saying it does come with some caveats as to what you're sampling there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, to talk better to the actual WRF model setup, I would need to refer you to our colleague, Rao Kodamarthi. But I think the actual communication of uncertainty, it's a great point. we've struggled with that ourselves, and have added some material across the site to make sure folks know that this is not the end all be all. It's just one model, one representation of potential outputs, and for that reason, sorry.
Well, yeah, I think I did. Go ahead, because I wanted to actually say something about your statistical method, which I liked a bit. So.
Oh, okay. I think we always emphasize that folks should focus on the change parameters. That's really the key here. Is what level of change do we see when we're holding kind of this model constant, or the model setup constant? So that's always been a key point of emphasis. Tom, I see you're off mute, so do you have anything to add there?
I have a couple of things that will not just to address part of Joe's question. So yeah, I mean, we've tried to capture one aspect of the uncertainty by looking at 3 different global climate models in forcing the WRF model, and completely understand that there's uncertainties, systematic uncertainties in the WRF model that may introduce some bias across all of those. We have had a lot of spirited discussion on bias correction in these models in particular, and have decided to focus on what Jordan mentioned, which is in particular the change values, with some assumption that any systematic biases in these models that are from the historical model runs are persistent also in future model runs. And so it's not that they completely cancel each other out, but they may do so to some extent. And therefore, the change values are really the ones that we've tried to emphasize in our communication with users. When we've discussed bias correction, what we run into is that part of the beauty of a dynamical downscaling is sort of the internal consistency in the model and our ability to look at things like coincident events. And if we bias correct temperature and precipitation or other values separately, we begin to remove some of that internal consistency. And so there's a trade-off in is bias correction worth it or not. We've evaluated some methods and even tried to develop our own method for bias correction where we maintain correlation between key variables, but some of it's sort of computationally prohibitive and it gets really confusing as whether or not it's actually doing what we think it's doing. So that's sort of where we've landed with some of that. So hear your comment and completely agree. And if we had the ability to and funding to do more models and more model runs, both with different GCM forcings, but also different regional models, we'd love to do it. But yeah, it's a known limitation for sure.
All right, thanks, Tom. Joe, did you have a follow-up?
So I just wanted to say, but I do like your statistical method to tie the durations together. I've been looking into some of those copula methods, but not tackled them yet. So I thought that was a very, very great strength of what you're doing. Thanks.
All right, Amanda.
Yeah.
Yeah, just coming in, and we had talked about this on some previous calls where our Argonne colleagues were on too, about the need to sort of get some of our modelers together with some of their modelers, and with the broader sort of academic community and regional leadership in the modeling community. So we know this is something that the community is struggling with, and there's limitations on what we can do with the science, but it's on our list of priorities to work together across the interagency. So just want to say, we're committed to trying to figure out how we can do the best we can with the resources we have across the U.S. government and within our sort of academic partner sectors. So the more you can help us define where your concerns are, where your wish list is, the more we can say this is the right tool for the thing that you need. And the energy sector is sometimes very different than the transport sector, which is sometimes right. So it's like when we talk civil engineering, we're talking so many different flavors of information. So that's what our whole task force is really trying to do. And we do believe that there is a place for everything that's going on at the table, because there's such a need. What I hear Joe saying and others say is like, the more you can help us understand which information is the right information for the decision we're making and what caveats and limitations does it have, the better, which, that's environmental services 101, right? So I just want to acknowledge it because it feels like we're dancing around it. But these are good questions, and keep challenging us to do better.
Right, thank you, Amanda. I mean, that was great. Because the comment I was going to make is, I've been doing science for decision making for 30 years, And it kind of, if you don't start with the problem, for example, the sensitivity to uncertainty is different if you're doing kind of a broad planning effort versus a policy effort versus, okay, I've got to design something and I've got to calculate a load and I've got to. So we need to do a better job from ASCE's standpoint of, what is it we're looking to do with this data? What is the engineering problem we're trying to do? And, designing construction is very different than managing, power plants and anticipating loads. So, it's all valid work. Human health is obviously very important, but I think the onus is going to be growing on us from ASCE to do a better job of being more specific. So it's kind of my way of encouraging some of the ASCE members on the call that might be new to these discussions to push some questions here. Ann?
I had intended just to observe, but I did put some comments in the chat, and I really want to lift up and rely on my engineer colleagues, some of which practice in Canada. The delta between use and analysis versus actually informing design values is a huge thing. And I want to have some, if the folks with Argonne could give a little bit more explanation about the utility in either of those arenas. Is it intended to inform design values? And some of the other questions that I put there in the chat. Because I've had feedback from other colleagues in different sectors who will not use ClimRR because of some of the limitations we talked about. And they're also looking at precipitation values. So it's just, where is the applicability, the start, stop? I know you've mentioned about, you put some warnings up there on the site, but I'm going to rely on colleagues on the phone to add to that, please.
Sure, I can start, and then I'll let Jordan also chime in, right? And also, to address Amanda and Dan's earlier comments too. The use case has been we've taken a very ground up approach with ClimRR, sort of working with the stakeholders and decision makers to understand exactly what type of information they need, and so. That's our starting point with power utilities, and as Jordan mentioned, to a lesser extent with emergency managers as well. And I'll just, Ann, I promise I'll get to your question, but I also want to just agree with Amanda, right? Like, we are extremely interested in working together on this, and I know that there's been a lot of focus at DOE right now on AI, and so I was interested in some of the AI discussions earlier. A lot of our sort of engagements with NOAA and the National Weather Service folks has been on AI modeling and some of those applications, but I'm hoping that we can also expand that into what we're talking about here today. So wildly in favor of more collaboration working together on that. And your question, right? So a lot of it started with power utilities trying to better understand heat impacts to their infrastructure systems. And so the IDF curves, the IEEE design standards for transformers and other assets that require sort of cooling to the environment deal a lot with extreme heat. So there were some extreme heat projections, less on the duration side, so less relevant to what we're talking today, where they're trying to understand what's the 90th percentile heat value. And so a lot of our projections around heat were trying to answer that questions for power utilities. For, yes, a design perspective, but also an equipment specification perspective. The IDF curve piece is less on, I guess, asset design and more on sort of system design, because it comes down to the duration of impacts affect load forecasting. So distribution planning and load forecasting for utilities, they see that there's a big uptick in sort of electricity demand from consumers when you get to a heat event that persists beyond a 2-day period. So when you have a 3-day event or a 4-day event. So a lot of this comes from trying to answer those questions for utilities. And yeah, there's a design aspect to that with transformer equipment specification. But there's other aspects of sort of management of power systems that has been driving a lot of the information that we put up on ClimRR. Wet bulb globe temperature, as Jordan mentioned, was because telecom utilities and power utilities have a lot of outdoor workforce. And so they're just trying to understand what the exposure to their outdoor workforce was. Are we going to have to shift a lot of our maintenance activities to evenings or times when it's less cool, or shoulder seasons? as Jordan mentioned. So, there's a design aspect to it, but there's also a lot of other sort of use cases for this type of data with this, I will admit, sort of narrower types of consumers of this data that we've been working with. Jordan, anything you want to add to that?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you got it.
I think that's the first thing here, right? We're all kind of trying to address different user communities. They don't all have the same needs and the same sensitivities. So we're trying to kind of figure out like how can DOE and the Argonne lab work with NOAA. It would definitely be a different product. It's not just putting a different label on an existing product. It's kind of like thinking more about the 30 to 50-year design life, because that does seem to be the civil engineering, especially these standards and manuals of practice. That's what they're struggling with, is how do I execute a standard of care when we're looking at something that's going to need to operate 30 to 50 years. That's really, I haven't found a user community yet that really thinks about it quite that way, because they're making decisions now that we're going to live with. I think I love the enthusiasm for working together, and I have a sense that Amanda can help us make that happen. But anybody else have any comments or questions from your use case perspective? Ahmed, how do you see I'm going to put some people on the spot. Sorry, Ahmed. How do you see, what are some of the things that you're wrestling with like ICE loading, et cetera, in ASCE-7? How does any of this resonate with you?
I will actually speak about the models themselves. So, for example, the spatial resolution and the right now we're using some of the data that we have. We're trying to find higher resolution, since freezing grain is really, like, if you started to look at like very big portion, you started to have like a convection of all of the parameters that we are looking for. Especially we are looking for the precipitation typing. And precipitation typing from temperature perspective, we're looking at the temperature at different level, the surface level, and moving up. And this is really very important for us to determine what is the precipitation type that we have. And I'm speaking about like from the cold temperature perspective, not from the high heat side. So this is one of the things that we are looking at, and Joe actually is aware of the challenge that we have from the precipitation typing thing. And also for the temporal analysis, we cannot have like a daily, we need to have like sub-daily data. And we're speaking about like 3 hourly at like we're gonna live with that, but hourly would be the thing that we're looking at. So these are some challenges we're looking at from the temperature. Another thing that we are doing, which we didn't do actually in the future condition this time, we're looking at the concurrent temperature during the ice load. And this is something that the industry are looking at, especially from the power line perspective. We didn't have chance to do this for the future condition. We're doing this right now or have been doing this for the historical data for chapter 10, the ASCE-7. So there are different things. Actually, especially the loss analysis was really very important and kind of like interesting for me looking at and what has been done. And I was trying to look if there is something that we can do for freezing grain from this perspective. So I will say like we again, I'm coming from an engineering side, but looking at the climate model side is going to be something that we're trying to like what is the thing that can help us as an engineering community. So yeah, that's what I have.
All right, thank you. Any reaction to Ahmed's? I mean, I think that's really at the heart of it. Craig, you got your hand up?
I think I may be more confused now than I was a couple of months ago. It seems that what we're hearing at this point is that we have a temperature IDF tool coming out from NOAA that appears to be on a somewhat different basis in terms of projections, and in any one point on the face of the earth may yield different projections. In civil engineering, we're all awaiting the availability of Atlas 15 Volume 2, which appears to be somewhat on the same basis as the temperature IDF tool is being developed, and we're hearing that ClimR is developing additional information regarding precipitation, which may vary from what Atlas 15 Volume 2 for any location in the country might project. And it seems to me that we may be adding a fourth dimension to our various forms of uncertainty. And I think at some point we're either going to have to explain to practicing engineer the difference between all these models projecting the same thing, or we're going to have to decide for civil engineering applications in general to use one or the other. And I'm not sure where and how this gets resolved. That's my comment.
All right, good point, Craig. I think that's definitely why we're all here, is try to understand that. Amanda?
Yeah, Craig, I appreciate how clearly you articulated that. A group of us at NOAA and with some modeling partners are working on a paper that is trying to articulate how different models work, where their strengths are, what's the right tool for the things. I think if we look at where everybody was 15 years ago, we were saying we're going to downscale the global models and we're going to produce the best information. We just need more computing power to do it. And then good relationships with decision makers. That is still one tool in the toolbox. But we're finding that there are some other approaches, some reanalysis approaches that are working, sometimes pulling to use the historical data and get as much out of it and look at those trend lines in sort of more mathematical, non-model type approaches. The IDF curve approach is another one. I think that there was just this general thought that if we can just downscale global models, it'll be the silver bullet that solves every problem we have. And I think there's still some continuation of that perspective, and that is part of the toolbox. But I don't think any of us anymore in the scientific community thinks that there is just one solution that's going to answer all the things that every user needs in this space. And so that's where this paper that we're trying to put together on like what projection services would look like, and when's the right time to use them, and what are different limitations of different types. We're hoping will be useful, but it's going to be a bit of an effort, because getting scientists to try and think of what a user would be thinking and vice versa is not an easy task all the time. So just we're again back to, I feel like my answer to everything is we're trying to get you what you're asking for. And in this case, we have a really smart group of people working on this. So thanks for raising that so clearly.
All right, and out of courtesy to everybody that's probably got another call, I'm going to go to Chris Anderson, and then we're going to wrap it up. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I just want to make one last comment. It's not simply on, I think, the side of the scientists to understand how all the models match up to all the problems, but also the users themselves. We were beginning to hear this earlier, need to understand that sometimes they're asking modelers for different products, and one product might be useful for guidance that's more a consideration and informs a subjective expert opinion, as opposed to a rigorous guideline or a rigorous standard, right? And so the users themselves, this is how we came about our working group, our task group, need to help define what are the requirements. And then when there's delivery, as much as possible, the deliverer needs to say, well, this is in fulfillment of certain requirements for a certain user group. So some of this confusion is going to be going away if we're upfront with our communication and just recognize that this is going to get, it's going to be segmented into lots of different uses, and each use is not necessarily compatible with the other.
All right, well stated. All right, well, thanks everybody. I appreciate everybody's time. We will be following up. And thank you all. Have a good rest of your day and rest of your week. Bye-bye.